Greetings all, I'm Propagandist, and you're watching a video that's neither a review nor a let's watch, that kind of video. So if it's not obvious by now with some of the videos I've been posting here on Propagandist recently, I'm a big fan of the anime franchise Girls and Panzer. And those of you who watched my review of the GuP movie, Dead Film, you'll probably remember that I hinted I might do some more content on this franchise, maybe some on Das Finale, which should have gone out by now as well, given that an increasing amount of information is becoming available about that, but also some more kind of specific stuff, various ideas that I've had about the franchise as a whole, and in particular, some content about the Girls and Panzer kind of universe. Now, fans of Girls and Panzer have probably always been wanting to learn more about the backstory of the world in which the franchise takes place. After all, what kind of world is this where high schools are situated aboard giant floating carrier ships and where young women engage in this very fascinating but admittedly surely very dangerous martial art involving the operation of armoured vehicles from before mid-1945? I mean, that must be impressive to look at, but it must be dangerous as all hell. And as a fan of Girls and Panzer myself, those sorts of questions always get me thinking. The franchise, as far as I'm aware, hasn't provided a great deal of information about the backstory of its world, though there are some, notable tidbits here and there. So for a fan like me, it's always a fun little kind of thought experiment to ask, underneath all of Girls and Panzer's moe adorableness, pulse racing action and tank service, what secrets and potentially dark truths might be hidden below? That's what we're going to be asking in this video. Whilst everything you're about to hear is mostly speculative, it's interesting and entertaining to think about nevertheless. So, as usual with these Girls and Panzer videos that I've been doing lately, a quick warning is necessary. Some of the things we cover here will be considered spoilerish, so if you're completely new to the franchise, if you don't want me to ruin anything for you, then now is your chance to actually navigate away from this video. We will be focusing particularly here on the TV series and and one of the OVAs in particular, so if you don't want anything spoiled about those, like I say, navigate away now. You've been warned, everybody. Also, I will of course be glancing fairly frequently from the camera to the left at my screen because, I have something like 6 pages of notes here that I want to talk about. So of course, I'm going to be referring to this quite frequently so that I, don't miss anything, I don't forget anything, things like that. And finally, of course, for copyright reasons, this video will not be featuring any actual footage from the GuP franchise. Instead, it will simply use static imagery where I want to flag certain things up. I know that might be disappointing for some viewers, but of course, sadly, Bandai Visual is very strict about their copyright, and, if you've been following my channel recently, you'll know that my current Anzio OVA review video is actually my second attempt at it, because my original video got copyright blocked for incorporating small snippets of footage. But if all of that's not an issue for you, then without further ado, let's get started. Apologies also for the jump cut. Just then something came through my letterbox and I momentarily had to pause the recording, but let's get back into things. So, I guess the most kind of logical place to start with a video like this is by asking, what do we actually know about the Girls and Panzer world in terms of stuff that the franchise canonically establishes? Well, the first thing worth saying is that in many respects the Girls and Panzer world is very similar to our own. Putting aside the oversized city ships and the various bits of information on the tanks used in Senshidou and how they operate for one moment, the technology we see in this world is pretty much at the same level, I'd say, as our own real-life world. Then there are the settings, most notably areas of Ourai town itself, which are depicted almost identically to their real-life counterparts. And some observant viewers will no doubt have picked up on the various references to well-known real-life businesses and consumer brands. But of course the question is, what happened in this world that resulted in the creation of these gigantic ships and the birth of a martial art predominantly practiced by females that recreates tank warfare in a manner that, for all the talk of participant safety, must surely be dangerous as hell? There are some particular instalments in the Girls and Panzer franchise that one might be tempted to look to here, and those are episodes 3 and 7 of the TV series, as well as the 6 short OVAs that were released afterward. These delve a little more into the subject of history, and it's worth mentioning them here. So, in episode 3 of the TV series, the Ourai girls find themselves up against their first opponent school, St. Gloriana, and their match is set to take place close to Ourai town itself. Indeed, it actually spills over into the town. And we're not talking here about the community on the school ship, but we're talking about the actual resort and port town after which their school is named. And as Anglerfish team are preparing to disembark, there's a rather interesting exchange of dialogue particularly between Saori and the rest of her team members. Namely, Saori mentions how everyone apparently used to go to school on land in this world. That's a notable point right there. According to these girls, there was a time when high schooling never took place at sea. So that begs the question, what changed? And how did this change, in fact? Was it a gradual change, or was it something sudden that happened very quickly? Then, in episode 7 of the TV series, we get some interesting historical details, one concerning the art of Senshido, the other concerning the school ships themselves. So in reference to the first of those points, ORI Student Council Vice President Yuzu tells us that Senshido has been going since the 1920s, which makes a lot of sense when you consider that tanks were first invented and fielded in the First World War, so it would make kind of sense for Senshido to emerge in the years after that. In reference to the second point, however, Rabbit Team actually asks why the school is situated on board a ship, and in response Anglerfish Team Saori tells them the following, that apparently the rationale of the ships is to nurture independence. Now that seems, straightforward and simple enough if you accept it at face value, but still, sending your high school students to sea seems quite an excessive way of doing that. Surely there are other options that don't involve, something quite so radical. I mean, yes, in real life there are people who send their kids away to boarding school, for example, but the thing is, these school ships amount to a kind of boarding school at sea, which is run in many ways by the students themselves. To me it just seems like such a drastic step, such a drastic solution to the problem of nurturing independence in your students. Surely there are easier ways to go about it than that, right? But then there's the third of the 6 OVAs that were released after the main TV series, and that OVA in particular is known as School Ship War. And this one was unique because for the first time the Girls and Panzer characters actually delved, to an extent, into details about these gigantic school ships. For the most part, these details simply concern how the ships are run, as well as various design details and facilities that are aboard them. But there is, towards the beginning, a limited amount of information given about the history of these ships and part of the rationale behind them, which tells us that the whole nurturing independence thing given by Saori is actually possibly only one part of a much bigger picture. So here are the interesting points coming out of the School Ship War OVA. Firstly, the school ships are not a new phenomenon in the Girls and Panzer world. Indeed, Mako actually suggests that the ORI school ship was built, and I quote here, it was built right after the war, which I'm guessing is a reference to World War II, since that's the last major conflict in which Japan was involved. Though of course without actual confirmation of that we can't actually say for certain if that's the case, but I do think that's the likeliest scenario here. Furthermore, according to Yukari, nations and civilizations throughout the history of this world have built school ships, from the Romans to the Venetians to the English. Now I don't know about you guys out there watching this, but this suggests an interpretation that I'd like to flag up right now. In the Girls and Panzer world, Japan is not the only state to build and field these vast ocean-going educational establishments. In other words, the suggestion I take from that is that more than one nation in this world fields these school ships, and they've also been possibly doing so for quite some time, certainly in the case of the European states, which the characters outright suggest. This also represents a divergence from real-world history, and it also represents something that may or may not actually be a contradiction of something that Saori said in episode 3 of the TV series. Saori said that there was a time long ago when everyone was educated on land, yet the fact that there were school ships dating from as early as Caesar's time suggests that, well, is that really true? Is what she just said actually correct there? Now, that might seem a bit contradictory, but having said that, you could potentially explain it away. There is a potential explanation for it. When Saori says everyone, is she referring to humanity as a whole, or is she actually referring to a specific populace, i.e. maybe just the population of Japan? So if we take that particular interpretation, then we could interpret it to mean that Japan was a bit of a historical latecomer to the school ship scene. Secondly, Yukari iterates something similar to what Saori mentioned in episode 7 of the TV series, that part of the rationale behind the school ships is to nurture independence in students, as well as a kind of broad outlook on life, quote unquote. And the reason why this is necessary, according to Yukari, is for something called the upcoming internationalisation. Now, She mentions that this was the brainchild, well, the school ships, that is, were the brainchild of an individual person who used their own funds to set up the first school ship, a process which, if I've understood the characters' dialogue correctly, is a process which snowballed and led to the creation of more of these school ships. Now, given that we can make the case that European states, at least, were using school ships long before Japan, then this individual may have been the one who got Japan into the business of utilising school ships in the first place. But no detail is actually provided in regards to who exactly this person is. So all of this seems straightforward, but there are still big questions that are left unanswered. Who was this person mentioned who was responsible for all this? And all we know, is that they made their decision long ago, so, as Yukari says in the OVA. So if Mako is correct in saying that the ORI school ship dates from right after the war, i.e. World War II, then we might be correct in assuming that the war referred to again was World War II, and that the person responsible for Japan's school ship development must have been living quite some time ago, presumably before the Second World War. Then there's this term upcoming internationalisation, which Yukari also referred to. What does that actually mean? Now my guess would be that she might be referring to the phenomenon of economic globalisation, so that gradual historical process of deepening interconnections between states, between markets, as communication technologies, transport and logistical capability advance. It's basically a process which depends greatly on maritime transit for the smooth flow of goods around the world. So it's it's possible that part of the rationale behind the school ships and high schooling at sea is to take full advantage of the benefits of economic globalisation. Maybe, that's just how I've interpreted it. But thirdly, and perhaps most interestingly, Yukari also talks about a world recession that took place at some point in this world's history, and how the Japanese government was prompted to partner education and shipbuilding in order to ensure the survival of the latter. When this world recession took place is not made clear, but the fact that the Japanese government apparently felt the need to respond to it by partnering two vastly different sectors seems a very radical, quite drastic solution. I don't know about you, but for me it raises another question. Just how bad was this recession? So just to reiterate, what I'm about to say here is very speculative, but I'm basing this judgment on evidence that we've seen from the TV series, from their film, and from the OVAs. So, in answer to the question of how bad this recession must have been, I would posit that it must have been utterly devastating. And here are a few things to think about, which might illustrate why this could be the case. So, let's go back to episodes 3, 4, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 and 12 of the TV anime. The reason I've picked these episodes is because they feature urban or at least partially built up, settled environments. Now, first thing to note, the urban environments we see in episodes 3, 4 and 7 appear to be fully functional inhabited settings. In contrast, however, the small town that we see in episodes 8 and 9 during the Ori vs Pravda match, and the larger city that we see in the Ori vs Kuromorimine match in the final episodes of the TV series, appear, to me at least, to be in a much more decrepit condition. They're possibly also uninhabited, and the reason I suggest this is, well, again, because of the contrast between these later settings and those of episodes 3, 4 and 7. Episodes 3 and 4 feature combat in the streets of Ori town itself, and in some of the shots we clearly see residents actually on the buildings, lining the roads. In episode 7, the Anglerfish teen girls stop by a functional hospital in order to visit Marco and her grandmother. In fact, actually also in their film as well, again, we have a combat scene taking place in Ori, and there are areas where people are around. But in contrast to that, the urban areas of episodes 8, 9, 10, 11 and 12 show no actual apparent signs of life. But this makes me wonder something. If a coastal town like Ori appears to be inhabited, yet these seemingly inland settlements that we saw in episodes 8, 9, 10, 11 and 12 appear not to be. So is there some kind of significance to this? So let's keep this thought in mind for a moment and add something else into the mix. Let's go back to the School Ship War OVA very quickly, because there's something else mentioned there which I'd like to point out. We know that Japan has at least several of these vast school ships in operation. The school ship war also gives us a hint of just how many people actually reside aboard these gigantic floating communities, how many people actually live on them, how many people actually work aboard them. So, according to Yukari's estimates, the ORI ship has somewhere around 30,000 people living and working aboard it. But larger ships, like the ones used by St. Gloriana, by Saunders, by Pravda, by Kurumorimine, these potentially have anywhere up to 100,000 people aboard them. So as a percentage of the sort of total global human population, the populace of an individual school ship might not be particularly significant, but it's not just one ship that we're talking about here. We're talking about quite a few of them. In fact, you know, not just potentially Japanese ships, but potentially also ships fielded by other states as well. So if you take all those together, the total number of people who are living and working at sea aboard these vessels must be a pretty damn high number. And so all of these facts and possibilities lead me to a very particular theory. A tenuous one, I will admit, but a theory nonetheless. What if, in the world of Girls on Panzer, this world recession, referred to by Yukari, was so severe, so hard, that it resulted in an exodus of people, whether gradual or sudden, I can't say, but an exodus nevertheless, from the inland urban areas to coastal settlements like Ori, where economic fortunes were better thanks to the decision of governments, certainly Japan's at the very least, to maintain the shipbuilding industry by partnering it with education, thus creating an economic stimulus centred around shipbuilding and maritime industries. People might also wonder why shipbuilding, of all industries, was partnered with education. My guess is that this goes back to what Yukari was saying in the School Ship War OVA about the upcoming internationalisation thing, that the government saw maritime industries as too important to the benefits of economic globalisation to be sacrificed, so it intervened to protect them. Now, some people might interrupt me here to say, hold on a second, propagandist, how do you know that the seemingly abandoned city, seen in episodes 9, 10, 11 and 12 of the TV anime, is actually inland? How do you know it's not by the coast? Well, I have a couple of reasons for this. The first and most obvious is that I'm pretty sure there are no camera shots at any time during the Ori vs Kurumorimine match that show a coastline or a port or any sign of the sea. So, returning from this momentary digression, the recession theory kind of makes a degree of sense in my eyes. It explains why inland settlements seem to be uninhabited, whilst a coastal settlement like Ori Town still seems to be thriving. It could also potentially explain something else, how the sheer financial costs that must surely be involved with Senshido don't seem to cripple the economy. This is another big issue that does need to be addressed. The gals of Girls and Panzer, you know, they go around causing God knows how much damage to their surroundings, how much, you know, God knows how much yen's worth of damage. And a quick perusal of the Girls and Panzer wiki apparently says that the Japanese Senshido Federation, or League, whatever it's called, they pay for any damage that's actually caused by Senshido matches. But surely, given the sort of damage these girls inflict, the sort of damage we've seen them to inflict in the TV series, in the film, you know, surely the amount of money that the League finds itself having to pay out must be an eye-wateringly high sum, given just how much physical destruction, as I say, these Senshido matches can inflict, especially when they're taking place in inhabited environments, such as the case at the start of their film, which features Ori, Chiartan, St. Gloriana and Pravda waging a fierce battle in Ori Resort Town. Plus, if you think about it also, there's the sheer physical risk to Senshido's participants. The insurance rates alone must be sky high. But this leads us to a theory, right? So keeping in mind that some of the inland urban areas may be completely abandoned, what if, depending on where the matches take place, the Senshido Federation doesn't always have to pay up for repair and insurance costs? If this little theory of mine is correct, then there are abandoned areas of the country where the authorities don't need to worry about repairs, about damage, about insurance, simply because nobody's actually living there. So if that's the case, then potentially this frees up a lot of money to be spent elsewhere, such as on the school ships, on Senshido, and on repairing and insuring those areas which are inhabited and which see Senshido action. Now, of course, I did concede a moment ago that my theory isn't watertight. It does rest on some tenuous evidence and a good degree of speculation based on said tenuous evidence. I won't go as far as saying that all inland cities and settlements in this world are abandoned or uninhabited. There is still some reason to believe, I think, that a section of the Japanese population in GuP still lives away from the coast. The amusement park in their film is notable in that regard. It appears to be situated in an inland area, but whether it's been abandoned or not is open to debate. Indeed, certain elements of the amusement park suggest that it either isn't abandoned or perhaps has only been abandoned recently, such as the giant inflatable animals that still seem to be in good condition, or the rideable bear that still seems to be functioning. Furthermore, there's another point raised by the School Ship War OVA, the fact that grade schoolers still go to school on land. Of course, none of the characters specify how far inland that is. They may still be located in very close proximity to the coast, but the point is that, we can't entirely discount the possibility that some elements of the population still live in inland areas, perhaps just not as many as before. And there's still no clarification of when this world recession actually took place, though we can speculate a little. My personal opinion is that the world recession in the timeline of the Girls and Panzer world could have been fairly recent, perhaps occurring at a similar point as the real-life financial crisis that hit our world in 2008, for example. The only reason I say this is because some of the architecture in the seemingly abandoned settlements, I'm referring specifically to the city in episodes 10, 11 and 12 of the TV series here, some of that architecture seems a bit too modern in my eyes to be pre-World War II. Again, I'll say here, I'm not an expert, certainly not of architecture in Japan, but that's just how I kind of view it. So I don't know whether you guys out there watching this will agree with me. So leave your thoughts below. So that's what my theory essentially boils down to. In many respects, the Girls and Panzer world is very similar to our own even, but it diverges historically speaking when it comes to seafaring and education. Giant school ships have existed throughout the history of this world, particularly fielded by European states early on, if school ship war is anything to go by, but there's reason to believe that Japan jumped on the bandwagon at some point thanks to an as of yet unidentified individual. This possibly occurred sometime prior to World War II, maybe in the early half of the 20th century. And that would kind of make sense for it being taking place in the early half of the 20th century because Japan was a rising economic power at that time. However, at some point in this world's history, there has been a serious global economic downturn that has led to two notable effects. Firstly, it has prompted the Japanese government, and feasibly other governments around the world, though we can't say that for certain, to partner education and shipbuilding, so as to preserve an industry which is vital to the historical process of internationalisation, referred to by Yukari, again which I interpret to mean economic globalisation. Secondly, with the greater emphasis on protecting maritime industry by partnering it with education, it has led to a massive movement of the Japanese population where the Japanese population from the inland areas, which were probably badly hit by the recession, to the coastal areas where marine-related industries were protected from economic woes by government intervention, and even perhaps to jobs on the sea. This suggests that some, perhaps not all, but a significant number at least, of inland settlements now lie abandoned, which might also go some way to explaining how the government, how the education ministry, how the Senseido Federation can afford to sustain tank-based martial arts in spite of the sheer costs that must be involved when it comes to insurance, damage repairs, etc, etc. So that's it summarised pretty much. Little else for me to say now other than what do you folks think about this? Do you think my theory holds any water, or on the contrary, do you think that there are any weaknesses, things that I've not accounted for, or maybe even just things that I've missed, or perhaps do you even have your own theory? Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. I definitely welcome them, it'll make for a good discussion. But other than that, there's little else for me to say now other than thank you very much for watching this World Theory video. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll definitely be doing more GuP content hopefully in the near future, especially since there's news starting to appear about this PS4 Girls and Panzer game that's supposed to be coming out, Girls and Panzer Dream Tank Match or whatever it's called. So I may do some material taking a look at that in the near future. I definitely want to actually, in fact, so it might make for something interesting. We'll see. I'll collate some information, see if I can make something out of it. But other than that, it's time to wrap this video up here, so thank you again everyone for watching. If you're not aware, Propagandist is my second channel. I have another channel, General Red Strategist, which is my main channel which gets updated much more frequently. I do gaming content on there, so if you're interested in actually seeing it, go and check it out. You can find a link to it in the video description or on the Propagandist channel page. There are also social media links associated with that particular channel, such as a Facebook page and a Twitter page, so if you want to check those out as well, see the video description. But other than that, thank you everybody, and I will sign up here before the gas from my tea starts disrupting my commentary any further. So thank you everybody, and goodbye.